Hello and welcome to Meditude, the medical tutorials. Our motto is understand, learn, and give your best performance. Let us start the medical tutorials with a very basic subject which lays the foundation of understanding the whole medical science, the medical biochemistry. In this lecture, we are going to discuss what is medical biochemistry and how we study it in a systematic way. Biochemistry means the chemistry of biology, means the study of interaction among biomolecules, the chemical interaction among biomolecules. But why do the biomolecules interact? They interact to sustain life. And since we are studying medical biochemistry, so a simple definition of medical biochemistry would be the study of chemical interaction among biomolecules to sustain human life. Let us see how the human life is sustained. Any individual takes energy from the environment in the form of food. This food is then broken down into its constituent biomolecules by a process called digestion. And these individual biomolecules are then subjected to a series of oxidative degradation reactions to produce energy by a process called metabolism. And this energy is then utilized in doing the various biological functions. This is how the life is sustained. Let us see what all are the biological functions. Digestion and metabolism, they themselves are important biological functions, and as we know that they are done by the enzymes, and enzymes are proteins. Another important biological function is respiration. Now here I am not talking about simple breathing in and breathing out. Here I am referring to cellular respiration taking place inside the mitochondrial electron transport chain, where the energy is captured in the form of ATPs. Now, this cellular respiration is done by the cytochromes, which are an integral part of the electron transport chain. And cytochromes are also proteins in nature. Another important biological function is locomotion. Not just locomotion, in fact, any muscular activity is done by the muscle proteins. Various biomolecules are transported in plasma. For example, hemoglobin transports oxygen, albumin transports bilirubin, albumin also transports fatty acids, transferrin transports iron, and likewise there are many proteins in plasma which transport some or the other molecule. Intracellular communication is a very important biological function in any multicellular organism like human beings, and this is done by the hormones. Most of the hormones are proteins like growth hormone, prolactin, LH, FSH, insulin, glucagon, many hormones which are proteins in nature. And not just hormones, even the receptors through which they act on the cells are also proteins in nature. There are many proteins which act as cell surface antigens. For example, CD4, CD8 present on the surface of T lymphocytes, Rh factor present on the surface of RBCs. Immunity. Immunity is provided by immunoglobulins which are also called antibodies, and they are also proteins. Proteins also have structural roles to play. For example, collagen, the most abundant protein in nature, which forms the structural framework of all the tissues. There are many other structural proteins like elastin, fibrillin, and many others. Apart from these, there are many proteins inside the cell or on their surface membranes which carry out many biological functions. To summarize, every biological function is done by the proteins. And as we know that every protein is coded by the gene. Now before going further, let us discuss a very important concept, the concept of genome. What is genome? Genome is the entire DNA content of a cell. Now, since life starts from a single cell, so all the cells in an individual have the same DNA. So we can say genome is the entire DNA content of an organism. In fact, not just organism, all the members of a species have the same DNA. Like your insulin and my insulin is same. Your growth hormone and my growth hormone is same. Means all the human beings have the same basic DNA. So all of us have the same basic DNA. So all the members of a species have the same DNA. So we can say that genome is the entire DNA content of a cell or organism or a species. That is the definition of genome. So it is basically DNA. DNA is a double stranded molecule where the two strands are held together by hydrogen bonds. It is not a straight molecule. The two strands are wrapped around each other, forming a double helix. So this is the structure of DNA. Let us suppose this is the entire human genome. The length of this human genome is 6.4 billion base pairs, or you can say 6.4 into 10 to the power 9 base pairs. Now, why I am saying base pairs here? Since the DNA is a double stranded molecule, its length is always expressed in the terms of base pairs. Like this is one base pair, two base pair, three base pair, four base pair, and so on. So the length of the entire human genome from this end to this end is 6.4 billion base pairs. And when we express it in the terms of standard units, it is 1.2 meters, approximately 1.2 meters in length. This 6.4 billion base pair lengthy DNA is not a single strand of DNA. Rather, it is divided into 46 segments or 23 pairs of segments of DNA, and each segment is called a chromosome. So we can say that human genome consists of 23 pairs of chromosomes or 46 chromosomes. As I said earlier, proteins are coded by the genes, and genes are nothing but a specific portion or a specific sequence of DNA. For example, protein number 1 is coded by gene number 1. Protein number 2 is coded by this portion of DNA, which is called gene number 2. Protein number 3 is coded by this portion of DNA called gene number 3. So, likewise, there are many genes which code for the different types of proteins. And in total, there are 23,000 genes in the whole human genome. To be precise, there are 22,300 genes as per the Human Genome Project. So far, we have learned that cellular functions are done by the proteins, and proteins are coded by the genes, that is the DNA. Proteins are not directly synthesized on DNA. In fact, DNA acts as a template to synthesize RNA, and DNA is present in the nucleus. So in the nucleus, the DNA acts as a template to synthesize RNA. Now this RNA then goes from nucleus to cytosol, where it acts as a template to synthesize proteins. So the genetic information flows from DNA to RNA to proteins. The genetic information, that is how the cell is going to function, how the cell is going to perform, that is contained in the sequence of DNA in the form of genes. And this information is then transcribed in the form of RNA. The RNA goes from nucleus to the cytosol, where this genetic information is then translated in the form of proteins, and ultimately proteins do the biological functions. Now DNA also gets replicated, means this genetic information is also transferred from a cell to daughter cell and from one generation to another generation, means DNA is also the hereditary material. So this transfer of information, the flow of genetic information from DNA to RNA to proteins, that is called the central dogma of molecular biology. The central dogma of molecular biology. This is the law of nature. The information always transfers from DNA to RNA to proteins. There is an exception to this. The exception is the retroviruses. In retroviruses, the genetic information is contained in the viral RNA, which then infects a host cell, where this genetic information is transferred from viral RNA to host DNA. Then it is transferred from host DNA to the host RNA, and then it is transferred to the synthesis of viral proteins to cause the viral infection. So this is the only exception. Otherwise, the genetic information always flows from DNA to RNA to proteins, That is the central dogma of the molecular biology. So, so with the background of biological functions and the flow of genetic information, let us see what we study in biochemistry. First, we study the proteins, the RNA, and the DNA. And the study of DNA, RNA, and protein constitutes an important branch of biochemistry that is called molecular biology. Secondly, we study about the metabolism and bioenergetics, means how we take the energy from the environment and how we utilize the energy in doing the various biological functions. And thirdly, we study the various biomolecules, the carbohydrates, the lipids, the vitamins, the minerals, the water. Biochemistry is not an easy subject. It has to be studied in a systematic way. So let us see how we study the biochemistry in a systematic way. First of all, we have to have a good knowledge of the biomolecule. So we start with the study of water. Then we study the chemistry of carbohydrates, the chemistry of lipids, the chemistry of amino acids, and how they form the proteins, and then the structure of proteins. After that, we study about the structure of DNA, the structure of RNA. After having acquired a good knowledge of the biomolecules, we study the enzymes, the bioenergetics, and the metabolism. And then we study the vitamins and minerals. After that, after having acquired a good knowledge of the whole metabolism and the chemistry and the structure of the various biomolecules, then we go to study the molecular biology, that is the structure and function of protein, the structure and function of DNA, the structure and function of RNA. And last but not the least, the application of molecular biology, that is the biotechnology. This is how we study the biochemistry in a systematic way. Before concluding, let us quickly recapitulate what we discussed in this lecture. The points to remember: genome, the entire DNA content of a cell or organism or species. The length of human genome is approximately 1.2 meters. In the terms of base pairs, it is 6.4 billion base pairs. And it is divided into 46 segments of chromosomes, that is 46 chromosomes. And there are about 23,000 genes. To be precise, there are 22,300 genes in the whole human genome. The central dogma of molecular biology is that genetic information flows from DNA to RNA to proteins. Exception is the retroviruses, where the genetic information flows from RNA to DNA, again to RNA, and then to proteins. Examples of retroviruses: HIV, HTLV. If you wish to better your performance in any of the exams and build a solid foundation for a great career in medical science, please like, share, and subscribe our channel, Meditute the Medical Tutorials.